Good morning, Ms. Richards.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, those who are watching around the country. We expect again to have somewhere around about 200 of you at home. In Bank, would you like to describe the circumstances in the room, Ms. Richards?
Certainly, sir. I'm here with one member of the Counsel team. There's one member of the Inquiry Solicitor team. There is Shimik, who will be displaying the rather large number of documents that we'll be looking at today and tomorrow, and two members of the Inquiry team who are here to ensure the smooth running of the day.
Now, today we hear about the presentation about the first Cardiff AIDS patient. This is something which was promised, I think, during the evidence of Professor Ludlam, and in part was responsive to his own personal investigations of what he thought had been the situation. But we have uncovered the facts and derived from the available medical records, such as they are. That's followed today by a presentation, the start of a presentation, about the Newcastle Hemophilia Centre. As I told you last time we met, Dr. Jones will not be giving evidence. Tomorrow that will conclude. But we ought perhaps just to have a look forward to the timetable thereafter, because it may suggest something which may be misunderstood. I think next week we have nothing but one witness for the Hemophilia Society scheduled, and then we move on to something else. And that, of course, is not, in any sense, all the evidence we're going to hear about the Hemophilia Society. Do you want to fill us in with the details, Ms. Richards?
Certainly, sir. We're hearing from Mr. Waters next week. We do intend to call other Haemophilia Society witnesses, but for unavoidable reasons have been unable to timetable them for February. And so it's likely that those other Haemophilia Society witnesses will be called at some point after Easter and before the summer break. The fact that we're calling Mr. Waters next week is not an indication that we're not proposing to call other Haemophilia Society witnesses. We will do so in due course. We then, as currently timetabled, have 3 weeks for the trusts and schemes. We are extending that by a week to include the week of the 22nd of March. So there will be 4 weeks of evidence, hearing from a number of key witnesses concerned with the Macfarlane Trust, Caxton, Eileen and Skipton, and we'll publish a detailed timetable as soon as we can in that regard. We intend to have a week's hearing looking at the 4 current devolved financial assistance schemes. That will probably be in May. The evidence and presentation that had been provisionally timetabled for the week of the 22nd of March, that relates to Trelaws and a presentation on other haemophilia centres, smaller haemophilia centres, will now be in May. And then we will conclude before Easter with evidence and presentation relating to Belfast as currently scheduled.
Thank you very much. I hope that that says plainly the full precise details will be given in due course. But I thought it important to let you know that we are proceeding next week with some evidence about the Hemophilia Society. It's not very neat because in one sense, the Hemophilia Society evidence might, you would have thought, be heard in one batch. But it is important, as I said at the very beginning of this inquiry, that we take the time we can, as quickly as we can, for obvious reasons. And it's convenient, as a matter of timing, to get this evidence heard, and then we can move on, rather than delay it till later. Thank you, Ms. Richards.
So as you've outlined, I'm going to start today with looking at the position of the first Cardiff AIDS patient. We have seen repeated references in documents that we've looked at over the last few months of hearings to a patient in Cardiff who was understood to be the first haemophiliac in the United Kingdom identified as suffering from AIDS. And what was known and understood about others in relation to his case at the time may be relevant to decisions and judgments that you will have to make in due course, sir, and that's the reason for this presentation. And as you've already referred to, you will recall Professor Ludlam, who himself had no direct knowledge of the patient at all, suggesting that it might have been a diagnosis made on a single clinical observation and perhaps casting some doubt on the diagnosis, and I hope this presentation will dispel those doubts. First, however, it's important to give a name to the patient. He was Kevin Slater, and to recognise that for his family, he was not and is not a case, but a young man who had his whole life before him. He was just 20 when he first developed symptoms of AIDS, and just 22 when he died. Kevin's older brother Paul was also tragically infected with HIV and died as a consequence of AIDS in 1991 at the age of just 30. Paul's partner, Linda Moore, and his daughter Rachel Sharland, so Kevin's sister-in-law and niece, have provided statements to the inquiry, and it is with their agreement that we identify Kevin and Paul by name. So, because the purpose of this presentation is to cast further light on the state of knowledge of risk of AIDS to people with bleeding disorders, I'll be focusing upon the development and identification of Kevin's illness in 1983 and 1984, and how his condition was understood and presented by those who were aware of it. And thus, other than to note that Kevin was a severe haemophiliac who received a range of factor concentrates, we don't address today the source of his infection or cover other aspects of his life. But I wish to emphasise again, for the benefit of his family, that we at the inquiry have read everything that Linda and Rachel have been able to tell us about Kevin and Paul, about their lives and their deaths, and the impact of their illnesses and deaths on their families. So I'm going to start by looking at a medical record from March of 1983 relating to Kevin. Shomit, could we have on screen, please, CVHB 0000-157_482. So we can see the first entry is a record from the 1st of December of 1982, which records Kevin being seen in the Hemophilia Centre. There's a reference to a discussion of his management. He was bleeding from his upper gum with Professor Bloom, and him being given 1,500 units of Lister factor 8. But the key entry for the purposes of the presentation is the entry that starts halfway down the page. So, Shumit, could we zoom in on the second half of the page, please? It's the 14th of March, 1983. It's not always entirely easy to read the handwriting, and so I may call upon you for assistance in relation to some parts of the entry. And we can see it says treatment centre, unwell since after Christmas, symptoms of reflux and dyspepsia related to food and bending over, not awake at night. And then I think it says some relief with, and it might be antacid, it's not entirely clear. And then this, anorexia, lost 1 stone, loss of energy, sleeps all the time.
May I just ask, just beside the 14383, before you get to the words treatment centre, there's a number. Is that 51 kilograms?
That's what it looks like, or it could possibly be 57. But that is indeed what it looks like.
But either way, that's really quite a low weight.
Yes.
Because 51 kilograms would probably be just over 7 stones.
Yes, for a young 20-year-old man.
Yes.
And clearly the loss of weight, loss of energy is a key feature of his presentation on that date. We then see, under previous medical history, reference to hepatitis, haemophilia has required a lot of treatment. And then I think the next line, Sir reads, sinuses washed out. there's then a reference to various drugs, some help, allergies, none. If we turn over the page, we can see there's a reference to smoking, none, alcohol, half a pint a night, works as precision tool engineer. And then on an examination, this is recorded thin, not, and that might say anemic, but it's not entirely clear to read. Some inguinal nodes, and then severe monolilial infection of entire mouth and facios, which would reflect severe candida infection.
Now the facies is the back of the throat, isn't it? So it's if you open your mouth, it's everything you can see, right,
Yes.
right down in the gullet. Yeah, thank you.
And then we can see there is then various matters recorded. It looks like pulse, heart sounds, chest clear. There's then an abdominal examination recorded. Some tenderness in probably epigastrium. And then if we look further down, we can see it says probable, 1, reflex esophagitis, and then 2, question mark, and then that probably says immunologic. I think I'd originally read it as immunodefish, but I think so you pointed out it's more likely to say immunologic, and I think that's probably right. And then there's a reference, I think, to undertaking a throat swab, LFTs, U and E, so that would be urea and electrolytes, full blood counts and film, barium meal and limited follow-through, see in clinic this week. So that's Kevin's presentation on the 14th of March, and we see from that a number of matters there being recorded of particular significance, the loss of weight, the lack of energy, and the severe candida infection of the mouth and throat. We don't, I think, know with any certainty. Sorry, sir.
Got some reference to the inguinal nodes,
Yes.
so there's something happening in the lymph glands in the groin.
Yes. And a query as to there being some immunological problem. It's not entirely clear from the signature, and obviously we can't see the signature on screen, but the name looks like it might be Dr. Liddell. It doesn't look like, in any event, it's Professor Bloom himself. However, if we then look at CVHB 40-157_017, we can see a laboratory form. We don't have a complete set, I think, of laboratory records. But this is dated the 17th of March 1983. And we can see there, Hemophilia, AIDS. So AIDS is first recorded as a potential diagnosis on the 17th of March, only 3 days after Kevin had presented with the symptoms that we have just seen. Now, we know that it's in the course of March of 1983 that UKHCDO, in conjunction with Dr. Krask from the Public Health Laboratory Service, was setting up a system for the reporting of possible AIDS cases. And although we've looked at these documents a number of times, it's perhaps useful to revisit them in the context of Kevin's particular case. So if we could have, first of all, Shumik, HCDO 40-517_001, please. This is the letter of the 22nd of March 1983, sent to all Haemophilia Centre directors by Dr. Krass, Dr. Ritzer and Professor Bloom, inviting directors to report possible cases of AIDS to the Public Health Laboratory Service. And you'll see from the second paragraph, sir, that the criteria for reporting cases are given in a paper, and they're said to be the same as those being used in the USA. And if we turn to the paper that the letter refers to, Shumik, it's HCDO 40-273_078. HCDO 40-273_078. We can see this is the AIDS 2 paper, Spectrum of Disease Presentation in AIDS, and we can see diseases specific for AIDS, and a number of diseases are set out that may be specific manifestations of or associated with AIDS. They include, obviously, PCP, and then we'll see references further below to fungal infections, including thrush. If we go over the page, we can see, thank you, under the heading viral, cytomegalovirus and herpes zoster referred to, and then AIDS-related diseases, non-specific diagnoses, pneumonia, central nervous system dysfunction, and then AIDS-related prodromal symptoms and signs. The following symptoms and signs have been common among AIDS cases prior to the diagnosis of the specific diseases listed above. Report all patients with any of these symptoms or signs. Throat pain and difficulty swallowing lasting more than a week, shortness of breath, fever lasting more than a week, diarrhea lasting more than a week, swollen lymph glands lasting more than a month, cough lasting more than 2 weeks, and then unexplained weight loss, which obviously was one of the factors recorded in relation to Kevin. And then hematologic or immunologic abnormalities, and it then set out that various laboratory test abnormalities are seen in a variable proportion of AIDS cases, and that includes their references to lymphopenia. And over the next page, we can see listed various abnormalities in relation to T cells. And the significance of that we'll see shortly. So that was the material that all directors, including, of course, Professor Bloom, as co-author of the 22nd of March letter, were working to. Now, we know that in the course of April 1983, Professor Bloom gave a talk followed by a Q&A session at the Hemophilia Society's annual general meeting. So, Shumik, could we just look at that, please? It's PRSE 40411. This is the Haemophilia Society's bulletin. Could we go to the second page, please, Shumik? We see the top left-hand corner, talk given at the AGM 23rd of April 1983. Our presentation note, sir, says the 22nd of April, so that may need to be corrected. 23rd of April, Professor Bloom. And if we look at the bottom half of the page, we can see on the right-hand side the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. The text of the talk in relation to AIDS doesn't refer specifically to Kevin's case. But if we go, please, Shomik, to page 5, and we look at the left-hand column just over halfway down the page. So if we go a little further down. Yes, no, that's fine. Thank you, Shomik. We can see there says Professor Bloom. This is on the left-hand side of the page, and this is the Q&A session. It is unfortunate that haemophilia has been linked with AIDS. Apart from that, we must not overlook the AIDS problem. One of my patients may have a mild form of it. And then he goes on to say, some patients show laboratory changes. Laboratory changes do not mean that it is a serious disease. I do not know of any haemophiliac with AIDS in the UK, France or Germany. I do not think we need to get over concerned about this. At the present time, it would be absolutely wrong to curtail treatment. That is as far as we can identify the first public reference by Professor Bloom to Kevin's case. And there may be, sir, something of a tension between the suggestion one of my patients may have a mild form of it, and I do not know of any haemophiliac with AIDS in the UK, France or Germany. But in any event, that is what Professor Bloom said. It was a couple of days after that, on the 25th of April, that Kevin was admitted as an inpatient to the University Hospital of Wales under the care of Professor Bloom. And Shomik, could we please have CVHB 40157_437. CVHB 40157_437. CVHB 40157_437. So if we look at the top half of the page first, we can see it's a record from the University Hospital of Wales. The consultant is Bloom, the department is haematology. The date, 25th of April 1983, new problem, self-referral, pain and swelling right testis, came on 2/7 ago, heralded by right loin pain in early hours of AM. Right testis became increasingly tender and sore and swollen over afternoon, felt hot and flushed. And then there's a reference to having seen the GP and having been prescribed antibiotics. And then it says continued pain in back and on right side. And then PMH, I think, previous medical history, severe haemophiliac, recent repeated tonsillitis, oral thrush, question mark, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, new, and then the triangle symbol for diagnosis. So there we see set out the particular symptoms that Kevin was reporting in relation to the pain and swelling, the oral thrush as part of the previous medical history, and the question mark AIDS being put forward as a suggested diagnosis. We can then see references to the examination that's undertaken. Sorry, I should just say in the left-hand column, just looking at the top of what we can see on the screen, in the margin, we've got a reference, I think, again to full blood count, urea and electrolytes and LFTs. And then it looks like it says 2,000 units pre-post, but it's not entirely clear what that refers to. So then, continuing with the examination, he's described as flushed. The temperature is set out. No significant nodes in axilla/cervical. No spleen, but then it says probably was palpable. No tenderness, no kidneys palpable, but small node inguinal is then recorded as part of the examination. So consistent with what we saw recorded for the 14th of March. And then it records large swollen right testis, tender and hot, not able to distinguish epididymis from testis. And then if we go over the page, looks like it says small prostate, now tender, no masses. The diagnosis is not entirely easy to read. Epididymo-orchitis, I think, possible bleed into a tumour/torsions. And then there is a plan to admit him and to carry out various tests, including, again, liver function tests and a full blood count. And then if we just look further down the screen, please, Shomik. We can see that the doctor there is Dr. May, lecturer in haematology. So that's the first set of records for the 25th of April. There's then a second set of entries. We go on to the next page. In a different set of handwriting, again, the consultant is ALB, which I would understand to refer to Professor Bloom.
I think may have happened here. If you go back to the previous page, you see admit A7.
Yes.
That's going to the ward A7. If you go back to the page we were just on, this is now in ward A7.
Yes.
So it looks as though there's been a triage. He's been admitted. This is now the note of examination on admission.
That I think is right, sir. We don't know who wrote this record. There is no name or signature at the end of the 2.5 pages in this particular set of handwriting.
It begins with emergency admission.
It does begin with emergency admission. And then if we pick it up in the third line, it says known case of severe haemophilia, also in the past has had recurrent attacks of tonsillitis, factor VIII level 0%. March 1983, troubled with oral thrush and tonsillitis, found to have leukopenia, lymphopenia, so that is presumably a record to the results of the various laboratory investigations, which we know were undertaken, but we don't have the results themselves. Question mark AIDS also has T-cell deficiency. So again, we can see being recorded here a number of matters that resonate with what we saw from Dr. Krask's AIDS 2 document in terms of potential symptoms of AIDS that require to be considered. In particular, we now see the blood count results and the T-cell deficiency. There is then a description of the swelling in the right testicle and further details given in relation to that. We can see that's this is a new symptom because it says no previous episodes, and then there is a description of having treated himself at home with factor VIII. If we go over the page, there's various matters of family history set out, and then there are various abbreviations used: SRAS, RS, CVS, UGS, CNS, which effectively record, for the most part, no symptoms. And then on examination, fit young man, no cyanosis, no clubbing, no LA, I'm not sure what that refers to, sir, no anemia, no jaundice. Mouth, now here it says no candida, which isn't consistent with what we see elsewhere in the records. But in any event, that appears to be what's there recorded. Chest, no signs of infection, chest clear. And then we have pulse, etc., heart sounds. If we go on to the next page, we can see an abdominal examination. And in particular, there is recorded the findings on examination in relation to the right testicle. Summary for urological opinion on cause of testicular swelling. And then there are various queries: bleeding to testicle, or I'm not sure I can read the next line, and then torsion.
Orchiditis.
Oh, it is, yes, thank you, sir. And then it looks like then.
Sorry. Read orchiditis.
Yes.
He's obviously thinking it could be this.
Yeah. And then the notes continue with the next entry being the following day, and a urological examination, which I don't need to go through, I think, any of the details of. But if we go to the last page of this document, as Kevin remained in hospital for a number of days, we see the entry for the 3rd of May at the top of the page. And below the diagram, we see clearly set out there the words oral thrush. Now, those are some of the records from that admission. There are two other sets of documents from the admission that we should look at. The first is CVHB 40-157_622. This is a form filled in on admission. It looks though it's filled in by a nurse, because we see in the bottom right-hand corner name of admitting nurse. Gives a number of details about the patient. But if we look in the second column along, we see occupation and type of accommodation, bungalow. And then if we look below that, we can see reason for admission / diagnosis. Pain and swelling in right testis, question mark, bleeds, question mark, epidemiorchitis, question mark, bleeding to a tumour. And then this, haemophiliac aid syndrome. So it's clearly being recorded by the nurse here, and it doesn't look as though there is any question mark there next to the phrase. It's clearly being recorded there as a reason for admission or a diagnosis, aid syndrome. There is also one entry in the nursing records we should look at.
Just before you go from that, the far right-hand column.
Yes, I should have gone to that.
Condition of mouth.
Yes, tongue-coated thrush being treated at present. So again, it's slightly unclear why there appears to be in that one reference that says no candida, when the other documentation suggests that there was indeed oral thrush.
And nutrition is poor appetite, it looks like, the last 2 days.
Yes, that is what it says. And then if we go to CVHB 40-157_624, and we look at the bottom of the page, this is an extract from the nursing records. We can see for the entry for the 25th of April 1983, it refers to being self-referral, known haemophiliac, pain and swelling in the right testis 2 days ago, went to GP, patient has pain also in his back and right side. Patient is being treated at present for oral thrush, following repeated tonsillitis recently. So again, there is that contemporaneous reference from the 25th of April to oral thrush. Patient is, question mark, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So again, the nursing records recording, although there with the question marks, AIDS as part of the records. Now that was an admission on the 25th of April. We now need to look at a key document completed by Professor Bloom. It's at WITN 3408009. And if we go to the second page, this is the AIDS 3 form. So this is the form that Dr. Krask, Professor Bloom and Dr. Ritzer circulated on the 22nd of March, asking for directors to report any possible cases of AIDS as part of the surveillance and reporting system. We'll look at this when we get to the last page, but this was signed by Professor Bloom and it's dated the 26th of April 1983. We can see set out there Haemophilia Centre Cardiff, the name of the patient, Kevin Slater, coagulation defect, factor 8 deficiency, date disease AIDS first suspected, 17th of March 1983. And that's the date of we saw on the laboratory test, which also recorded AIDS. So we have 17th of March of 1983, identified by Professor Bloom as the date upon which AIDS was first suspected. Date of onset of symptoms, early March 1983, oral thrush, probably January 1983. Then a little further down, there's the question, any specimens of serum and or lymph node or other organs from biopsy or post-mortem available for study? Yes. And then Professor Bloom writes, stored serum or plasma. So that would clearly indicate that Cardiff had, certainly in relation to Kevin, stored samples of his sera. And then we have main clinical features and a ticking boxes yes or no. Malaise, ticked yes. Loss of weight unexplained, ticked yes. Enlarged lymph nodes lasting more than 1 month, ticked yes. The other symptoms ticked no. So 3 clinical features identified as significant there by Professor Bloom. If we go to the next page, please. We can see, if we look at zoom in on the top part of the page first of all, please, Shomik. Recurrent tonsillitis for 5 to 6 years, 1977, and then other symptoms and or signs, dysphagia, oral and esophageal candidiasis, and then epididymo-orchitis, April 1983. So that's the reference to the problem with the testicle that we've seen recorded in the notes.
Dysphagia is one of the items which is identified on the checklist in AIDS 2, is it?
I need to double check that, sir.
Yes.
I'm not sure that it is, but I'll double check.
Can we just...
Should we go back to that? It's HCDO 40273_078. HCDO 40273_0. So that's it, great. So on the first page, we've got the various infections listed, including under fungal infections, candidiasis, thrush, and then various other fungal infections. If we go over the page, we've got the viral infections, bacterial infections, AIDS-related diseases, and then the prodromal signs and symptoms and signs.
Well, they're difficulty swallowing.
Yes.
More than a week, which is what I had in mind. I thought it had actually used the word dysphagia, but it doesn't. It just says swallowing. That's my over-interpretation.
And then, of course, the lymphopenia, which we've already seen set out in Kevin's records. So if
we haven't got there yet on the on Professor Bloom's letter witness 3408-009.
Yeah. So if we could go back to that, please, Shane, we can go to the third page. WITN 3408009. So we then have a series of laboratory investigations. We can see that the date was the 17th of March for a number of the investigations. The results are there set out. And then we have BA swallow, March 1983, esophageal candidiasis. And then reduced killer and natural killer cell activity, April 1983. We then have serological studies listed. Just draw attention to the fourth, herpes simplex, and Professor Bloom has written in the right-hand margin next to that evidence of infection. And then under the heading Other, and I'm not sure I can read the first entry.
No virus, first one.
Thank you. And again, Professor Bloom has recorded evidence of infection in the right-hand margin. Hepatitis B is negative. Then if we go over the page, we can see that the various other factors that may have give rise to a causal connection with AIDS are effectively discounted. So sexuality, drug addiction, visiting the US, contact with patients known to or suspected to have AIDS are all negative. Has the patient received any of the following blood products? And we can see factor 8 is ticked. This is since January 1980. Has the patient received any other blood products since the 1st of January 1980? Cryoprecipitate is ticked. And then if we go on to the next page, we see Elstree NHS factor 8 concentrate is ticked and cryobuline is ticked.
Can you go back to the blood count?
It's the third page, Shomik.
Now, the results are shown there for the T cells, the absolute lymphocyte count, and the T helper suppressor ratio. They would require interpretation, I think, if you're going to make anything of what is said there. But it was those findings which gave rise to the comment that there was lymphopenia.
Presumably so, yes. Yes, exactly. So, as it were, they've been interpreted for us through the records. There's also reference to the reduced T cell activity in the records themselves. So if we then go on to the fifth page, Shomik, and we zoom in on the bottom half of the page, please. Various questions in terms of the patient's history are answered in the negative, and then this. Final clinical diagnosis, probable acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Not possible, no question mark. The diagnosis is probable AIDS on the 26th of April 1983. And although, sir, you can't on the screen see the signature, I can tell you that the signature is that of Professor Bloom.
So if one is applying a legal test of the balance of probability, if this were a legal matter, he would have AIDS.
Yes.
If one is looking for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then one isn't. So it's the difference between what is probable, what is proved to a civil standard of proof, and what is absolutely certain.
Yes. And of course, it's entirely open to a clinician to record something as being possible or suspected, to include the question marks that one conventionally sees in the medical records. Professor Bloom has elected here, in a form he is submitting in accordance with the surveillance and reporting scheme set up by UKHCDO, to identify this as a probable case of AIDS.
Yes.
Now that's the 26th of April 1983. If we go to DHSC 001 228, please. DHSC 0001228. Now, we've looked at this before. We know from a letter, which I won't put on the screen, but there's a letter from Professor Bloom to Mr. Waters, 3rd of May 1983, which encloses his draft of this, which was then published on the 4th of May 1983 by the Haemophilia Society. So this is a week or so after Professor Bloom has diagnosed Kevin as a probably suffering from AIDS. We see the text, if we could zoom in on the main paragraph, please, Shomik. It refers to reports from America of AIDS in persons with haemophilia causing anxiety. Says we are no strangers to infectious diseases such as hepatitis, etc., etc. Refers to investment in the blood products laboratory at Elstree, and then says this: bearing this in mind, it's important to consider the facts concerning AIDS and haemophilia. The cause of AIDS is quite unknown, and it's not been proven to result from transmission of a specific infective agent in blood products. The number of cases reported in American haemophiliacs is small. And then he says this: and in spite of inaccurate statements in the press, we are unaware of any proven case in our own haemophilic population. And then he goes on to record the lack of cases from Germany and to talk about the system of monitoring set up by Haemophilia Centre directors and the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre. So you will no doubt wish to consider, in light of what we've seen was Professor Bloom's own diagnosis of Kevin on the 26th of April 1983, the message here set out by Professor Bloom to the effect of, we are unaware of any proven case in our own haemophilic population. Much may turn on what he meant, I suppose, by proven. But whether that was a misleading statement is no doubt something you will wish to consider.
Well, if he had been applying the usual test of proof, then he had himself said it was proven. If he is applying a rather stricter standard of looking for absolute certainty, you can see an argument that he wasn't. But it depends how it would be understood, and perhaps intended to be understood by those who read it.
Yes, and be that as it may, what it doesn't say is, we are aware of a probable case in our own haemophilic population, which would have been, on any view, correct and not misleading. There are two... sorry, but actually, before I look at those documents, there are two documents not referred to in the presentation I want to go to in a moment. But we know that Kevin's case was reported to CDSC, to the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre. We don't know the precise mechanism or the date, so we don't know whether Professor Bloom reported Kevin's case directly or whether the mechanism was Dr. Krask passing on the AIDS 3 form or a summary of the AIDS 3 form to CDSC. But we do know that they knew in early May of the case, and we see that from, again, a document we've looked at before, PRSE 40353. And if we zoom in on the first, just over the first half of the page, we can see the date there. This is the Communicable Disease Report for the week ending the 6th of May 1983, and under the heading Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, Cardiff. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome has been reported in a 20-year-old man with haemophilia in Cardiff, and then it goes on to summarise what we've seen set out in the records. So the candida, the epididymoorchitis, the lymphopenia, low T helper/suppressor ratio. This is the first report of AIDS in a patient with haemophilia in the UK known to CDSC, so treated by CDSC as an AIDS case.
And what is quoted there is what Professor Bloom had himself put in the report.
Yes, it's certainly entirely consistent with it.
and although Professor Ludlam thought that it had been based entirely on the finding of candidiasis, there's much more to it than that.
There is, and of course there's also the unexplained and significant weight loss, not recorded here, but clearly recorded from March onwards.
And the lymphopenia and the low T cell helper suppressor ratio and so on.
Yep.
And the dysphagia, yes.
There are two additional documents I just want to put up on screen from early May in which Kevin's case is discussed. The first is HSSG 001 0055_001. So the system's running slowly today. There are so many documents loaded on it that I think it's slowing things down. It's not currently on my screen, Seamus, although I can see it is on other screens. So, do you have the document on your screen?
No, I don't.
No. It's showing on some screens in the hearing room and not others. Do you need the reference again? Thank you. So, if we can just go to the... We're just missing a heading on the top of the page. Thank you. So we can see acquired immune deficiency syndrome AIDS, note of a meeting convened by Welsh Office Medical Services Health Professional Group, 4th of May 1983. So this is a Welsh Office meeting on the 4th of May of 83, and it's a meeting convened to discuss, in effect, Kevin's case. In attendance are four from the Welsh Office: Dr. Crompton, Dr. Lovett, Dr. George, Dr. Ferguson-Lewis. There is Dr. McAvoy from the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre. There is Dr. Scone, the Chief Administrative Medical Officer with South Glamorgan Health Authority. There is Dr. Napier, the Welsh Region Director of NBTS. And there is Professor Bloom. So they are all in attendance at this meeting. And we can see it said the meeting was arranged to discuss the background circumstances of and implications arising from a publicly reported case of AIDS treated at the University Hospital of Wales. The background history, can we just zoom in on the paragraphs under the heading background history, Seamus, just to make it a little easier to see? Perfect, thank you. So we can see a background history is set out, which inferentially would seem likely to have come from Professor Bloom. Of all the attendees at the meeting, he is the likeliest to have this information. Refers to a young man who has throughout his life had treatment with factor VIII concentrates of various sources, reference to having had only British factor VIII concentrate in 81, 82, 83. Prior to that, Austrian made factor VIII. Just before the Christmas of 1982, he developed oral thrush, which progressed despite treatment initiated by the GP. He eventually presented with a total leukopenia, a severe lymphopenia, a deficiency of T lymphocytes, a deficiency of T helper cells, a reduced helper suppressor T cell ratio, and a history of recent weight loss of 1 stone, which was thought mainly due to the difficulty in eating and swallowing occasioned by thrush. So we effectively have there the interpretation of the blood results for us, presumably from Professor Bloom. Somewhat disturbingly, 10 days ago, the patient presented again with epididymal orchitis. The etiology is unknown, but he may have had a bleed into the right testes. a protracted history of repeated attacks of tonsillitis. And then if we look under medical assessment, it is clear that this young man presents a clinical picture which fits within the case definition as set by the CDSC at Colindale. So again, the consensus view that appears to be recorded at the meeting is that this is a clear picture of AIDS. Under the heading Public Statements, we see reference to the Haemophilia Society meeting. On 23rd of April, Professor Bloom addressed a meeting of a patients' Haemophilia Society in London. He spoke from a typed manuscript in which reference was made to the fact that there was no definite case of AIDS amongst haemophiliacs in this country. I'll go to the next page, please. If we could zoom in on the top half of the page, first of all. Great. However, in a discussion which followed, he admitted that a case had been treated in Cardiff which showed some of the features of a mild possible AIDS. On Thursday, the 28th of April, Susan Douglas, medical correspondent of the Mail, made contact stating she knew that Professor Bloom was treating a patient with AIDS, saying she'd been so informed from a number of undisclosed sources. Professor Bloom neither confirmed nor denied the statement. Yesterday, Tuesday, the 3rd of May, the South Wales Argus rang Professor Bloom to ask whether the patient reported in the press was I think that's the location, patient. There being so few haemophiliacs in any given location, it was important not to give any information, and Professor Bloom would not comment. Professor Bloom has provided all relevant information as a precautionary measure to the Medical Protection Society. Only one patient has telephoned and seeking information and advice. Then there's a reference to reports in the Guardian newspaper on the 4th of May. The suggestion it's believed that the Haemophilia Society's London liaison office is to take up with the Press Council the matter of inquiry through misrepresentation as a result of approaches they've received from the press. And then, under the heading Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre Colindale, Colindale had received notification of the Cardiff case, but has no information in respect of the second alleged case referred to in the Mail article of Sunday the 1st of May. The Cardiff case fits the CDSC case definition with its depressed cellular activity and immunosuppression deficiency. Haemophilia directors and public health laboratory services have been circulated with a description of AIDS, that's presumably the document from March 83, and a statistical office has been established in Oxford. Some 14 cases or so have been reported, none of whom are haemophiliacs, all of greater severity than the Cardiff case. The CDSC has been similarly bombarded with telephone inquiries from the press. And then there is a reference to systems of reporting AIDS to CDSC, 3 mechanisms, death registrations, laboratory reports by microbiologists, and clinical reports from various consultants. It's believed that the CDSC data underestimates the problems because patients may present to doctors in other specialties. Letters have been published in the journals inviting wider reporting, and that's a reference to a BMJ publication of the 23rd of April, BMJ 1983. And then if we go over the next page, the meeting continues, and obviously these are important discussions that you'll want to consider in due course, but it continues with more general matters. Moving on from the specifics of Kevin's case, there's a discussion under the heading Impact of Publicity on National Blood Transfusion Service in Wales. There is then American experience of blood transfusion / blood products association with AIDS, and it refers to 2 cases having been reported in patients receiving whole blood, one of which concerned a child, a dozen cases amongst haemophiliacs in the US, and it refers to public health measures in the US. Extent of reliance upon USA component, we're still reliant to a very large extent upon the USA, some 50% of factor VIII is still obtained from that source. And then there is a discussion under the heading, what would be the effect of a ban of American factor VIII? It's described as being, it would be far-reaching. Blood product laboratories in the UK are presently working to capacity. If we were in Wales to attempt locally to make good our own deficit, it would require a great deal of extra facility. It would follow that a ban on imported factor VIII would necessitate a reduction in patients treated and the modification of the home treatment facility. There is then reference to the size of the haemophilia population and particular details given about the haemophilia population in Wales. And then over the page, can we go on using factor VIII? It stated that the asserted greater risks arising from the use of purchased blood as opposed to voluntary donated blood is less than hitherto with the greater awareness of the AIDS problem. And then it says, no justification on the basis of facts so far established to ban the importation of factor VIII, though it was thought preferable in the case of children to restrict treatment to the BPL concentrate produced in Britain. And then a reference to nursing and laboratory facilities and suggested further action, a letter in confidence from CMO to Chief Administrative Medical Officers and all consultant clinicians, and agenda item for next CAMO's meeting. So, we've not previously looked at that document in the hearings, which is why I wanted to spend some time on it. But in terms of Kevin's own case, it is clear that the meeting regarded his condition as falling within the CDSC definition for AIDS, and that indeed was the basis for the discussion that then followed. There is one further document arising out of the meeting that we should look at, HSSG 0010055_002. This is a note or minute dated the 4th of May 1983. It's from Dr. Ferguson Lewis, who was Senior Medical Officer in the Welsh office and one of those attending the meeting. And you'll see it says, a meeting of the Chief Medical Officer, together with others of his staff, with the Director of the Cardiff Hemophilia Centre, Professor Bloom, who is also Professional Advisor to the Hemophilia Society, and Dr. Napier, Director of the Welsh region of the National Blood Transfusion Service, took place this morning. Dr. McAvoy of the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre was in situ attendance. The Minister will wish to be advised that, 1, the patient of the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre does meet the CDSC case definition. And then it continues, the patient's clinically well, certainly does not have a severe form of the disease. There are about 100 haemophiliac patients in Wales, 2,200 in the UK as a whole. There are no other reported cases. There are many other types of patients who are recipients of blood or blood products. There is no proven connection between this reported case and the use of imported factor VIII, that word proven again. The level of risk, if any, were to exist to the populace as a result of use of imported blood products is very small. There is therefore no cause for precipitate action. The line advised continues to be that though sensational reporting in the press has caused concern to very many people, no, and then the word established has been asserted, no established link between AIDS and blood transfusion has been proven. DHSS have informed me that the Minister is to meet the Hemophilia Society on a date soon, but have not yet fixed. And we can see bottom of the page, correction of above, telephoned to, and then it's not clear to me who that is a reference to. But in any event, we can see that the Minister, and anticipate this is probably a minister, junior minister in the Welsh office, that's what they're referring to, being advised, or an intention to advise him, that the patient of the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre, i.e. Kevin, does meet the CDSC case definition, and this is the 4th of May. So those are records in relation to the Welsh Office consideration of Kevin's case. We know that the Department of Health and Social Security in London was alerted to the development, and we can see that from DHSC 0002227_021. This is 6th of May 1983. It's from Mary Sabellis to Dr. Oliver, AIDS, American Factor 8. Dr. Spence Galbraith telephoned from CDSE this morning with the following information. The male patient, aged 23 years, so the age is wrong, in Cardiff, who is a known haemophiliac, now appears to have the right symptoms and signs for a diagnosis of AIDS, and those are then set out, including opportunistic infection in the brackets. He has been ill for a month and has been treated with American Factor 8. And then it continues in the next paragraph that Dr. Galbraith last night received information from Spain that 3 haemophiliac patients there are thought to have AIDS and also have been treated with American Factor 8. Next paragraph, Dr. Galbraith asks that the department should consider the matter as a priority and that any top-level meeting should include CDSC. And of course, we've looked at on a number of occasions Dr. Galbraith's own communication to the DHSS a couple of days later. With his, if we then go to WITN 3408013. And we go to the second page. We can see here that Dr. Krask at the Public Health Laboratory Service was seeking by the 10th of May to identify the likely source of Kevin's infection. He is submitting records to Miss Spooner at Oxford. Enclosed is the past transfusion records of Kevin's status since 1975. We are particularly interested in cryobilin of American origin transfused since 1st of January 1980, and also the batch of armour factor 8 he received early in that year. And then there are a number of papers of records which I don't propose to go through. We can then see a reference to Kevin at the special meeting of Haemophilia Reference Centre Directors on the 13th of May 83. Shomic, that's HCDO 603_008, please. We've looked at this these minutes obviously on a number of occasions over the last few months. 13th of May 1983, special meeting, present Professor Bloom, Dr. Krask, various others there listed. And then the purpose of the meeting was to consider the position in relation to AIDS. If we pick it up 6 lines down in the main text, there was clearly a need for Haemophilia Centre directors to discuss what should be done with regard to the surveillance and reporting of suspected cases and the management of patients. And then this. To date in the United Kingdom, 1 haemophiliac is suspected of suffering from AIDS. So that's how it's recorded in these minutes as a suspected case. Again, we don't see use of the word probable. We can also see that in addition to Kevin's case being referred to by reference centre directors, there's a reference to it in a May 1983 meeting of the Council of Europe's Committee on Blood Transfusion and Immunohematology. Shomic, that's CBLA 0001710. This is a note compiled by Dr. Gunson. If we just look at the heading, Central Blood Laboratories Authority acquired immune deficiency syndrome, report on the discussion which took place at the meeting of the Expert Committee on Blood Transfusion and Immunohematology of the Council of Europe, Lisbon, 16th to 20th of May 1983. And if we could go to the second paragraph, please, Shomic. The committee was interested in the possible association of this syndrome with the transfusion of blood and blood products. Although some 12 patients suffering from haemophilia have contracted AIDS in the USA, the incidence in Europe to date has been much less. There is one patient in the UK whose symptoms fulfil the criteria defined for AIDS. That's Kevin. And there is one further possible case. It's not clear what that's referring to, sir. And then there's a reference to 2 haemophiliacs in Germany suspected of suffering from AIDS and a possible case retrospectively diagnosed after death in Finland.
It doesn't appear to have picked up the Spanish cases.
No, it doesn't. The Spanish cases are, however, referred to in a further DHSS document, DHSC 302229_019. So this is headed background paper on acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's not, I think, dated, but it appears to have been prepared, we've seen from other documents, for a meeting to take place in early June of 1983. If we look at the bottom of the page, is it transmitted in blood or blood products? As yet, there's no conclusive proof that AIDS is transmitted by blood as well as by homosexual contact, but the evidence is suggestive that this is likely to be the case. The evidence relates to some 11 haemophiliacs in the USA and 3 in Spain, in whom the most likely explanation for the development of AIDS was their exposure to American factor VIII concentrates. There's also some evidence that AIDS has been transmitted to babies in blood transfusion. So the Spanish cases are there picked up, but not the German ones. Over the page.
Not the German, not the Finnish.
No.
It's very patchy.
Over the page, second paragraph, there is reference to Kevin's case, AIDS in haemophiliacs in the UK, and then somewhat curiously stated here, there is one suspect case in Cardiff, although CDSC states that this case meets the USA criteria for AIDS. The clinician in charge does not consider that it should be regarded as a confirmed case. There is also a possible case at the Bristol Royal Infirmary, but it may not meet the criteria. Further details are being sought, and of course we know the Bristol case did indeed meet the criteria. But that appears to suggest a difference of approach between CDSC, confident that the case meets the USA criteria, and Professor Bloom, the clinician in charge, not considering it should be regarded as a confirmed case, which, so again, it may be difficult to reconcile with his own completion of the form and identification of this as a probable case of AIDS.
It was also difficult to reconcile with the description given to the Welsh office that the picture was present.
Yes.
But it was clear that the picture was within the case definition. So you have the 2 words probable and clear on the one side and suspect here.
Yes, suspect and not confirmed here. We know that Kevin's case was certainly included by the Department of Health in tables which it was compiling to track cases. So if we look at DHSC 302229_112, we can see this is dated the 6th of July 1983, Mary Sabellis to Dr. Field. AIDS case summaries table, I've now updated the epidemiological table. There are now 14 cases in England and Wales. I'm circulating the table to all those with an interest so that ministers can receive the most up-to-date information we have. And then if we go to the table itself, which is DHSC 302229_113, we see acquired immune deficiency syndrome case summary, England and Wales. And if we look down to case 8, that is a reference to Kevin's case. Cardiff, is where reported. Date reported May 1983. Date confirmed May 1983. Nationality, ethnic group British. Male, 20, and then the diagnosis. Candida AIDS, epididymoorchitis. Date of onset, December 1982. Date of diagnosis, May 1983. Alive, heterosexual. The next entry, nil, is travel and US contacts, nil. Blood or blood products, haemophiliac, USA Factor 8, 1981, NHS Factor 8 since 1981. So there, Kevin's case clearly being recorded by the Department of Health in its epidemiological table. And at that stage, the only bleeding disorder case so recorded by the Department of Health. If we skip on 3 months to the updated tables, DHSC 0002235_115. We can see it's from Mary Sibelius to Dr. Field again. It's an update to the epidemiological table, taking it up to the 12th of October 1983. There are now more cases. The case numbers are 25. One case has been excluded, it would appear. If we go to the next page, we see the same entry in relation to Kevin's case at case number 8, the Cardiff case. If we go to the next page, you'll see there is circled a case in Preston, reported 20th of June 1983, confirmed 23rd of June 1983. The diagnosis is there set out. And that's recorded as being a case of blood transfusion during abdominal surgery in 1979, transfusion records being checked. But then we see the Bristol case recorded at number 17, date reported 6th of September 83, British male, early 20s, PCP, and haemophiliac who received factor 8 concentrate in December 1981 is there recorded. We haven't yet tracked through what we know of the Bristol case, but that's its inclusion in these epidemiological tables being maintained by the DHSS.
What is interesting about that one, if on the date of diagnosis, 3rd week of August. So if this is the same as the suspected Bristol case, it's a late diagnosis.
Yes. Yes. And then reported to, I don't know whether that's reported to CDSC or to the Department of Health, 6th of September.
Yes.
If we return to Kevin's own case and look at CVHB 40.157_421. CVHB, it's okay, 40.157_421. We can see on the 17th of June, Kevin being readmitted to hospital. He's recorded here as having a chest infection, nausea and vomiting. There's a reference to March 83, him having been troubled with oral thrush and tonsillitis, found to have leukopenia, AIDS, also had T-cell deficiency. There's then reference to the cough and towards the bottom of the page to the nausea and vomiting. And if we go over the page, bottom half page, the OE on examination, we can see written on the right-hand side, oral thrush. If we go to the last page, we can see bottom half impression, chest infection, ? Nausea and vomiting due to antibiotics. Again, reference to there being various tests proposed, including a full blood count. and then what looks like a reference to pneumocystitis, like, it may be, I'm not quite clear.
Maybe titer, is it? Or titer?
Oh,
So
yes. Yes, it probably is.
So a test to see whether he has pneumocystis.
Exactly, and then reference to the also full blood count testing. Again, I don't need to go through all the records, but there are records of oral thrush. If we go to the admission sheet, CVHB 40157_618. We can see in the second column along from the left, under the heading Reason for Admission Diagnosis, Haemophiliac Aid, and top of the next column, Additional Health Problem, Haemophilia AIDS Syndrome. He's also described as pale and underweight, so again clearly recorded in his notes. Again, there are a handful only of laboratory results which records the presence of the oral thrush. And then if we look again at what's being said by those in charge of UK HCDO in June, HCDO 40270_004. Again, this is a letter we've looked at on a number of occasions. It's from Professor Bloom and Dr. Ritzer to other Haemophilia Centre directors, and it's only the first paragraph I need to look at for today's purposes. So this is the 24th of June 1983, and we've seen everything set out in Kevin's records to date. This says in the third line, so far one possible case has been reported to our organisation. This patient, A1, and we know from other documents that's Kevin, conforms to the definition published by the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, but cannot be considered as a definite case. We're not aware of any other definable patients amongst the UK haemophiliac population. So the message being sent out to other directors by this communication appears to be a possible case rather than a probable case. We know that in the following month, and I'm not going to go to the documents which we looked at in the course of the presentation on the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre, but the Haemophilia Society approached Professor Bloom again asking if he wanted to update his 4th of May 1983 message, and he said that there hadn't been any major change and didn't see effectively the need to do so. We can see, however, in the British Medical Journal in August of 1983, what was being said by CDSC. So if we go to DHSC 302231_019, this is British Medical Journal, 6th of August 1983. We can see it under the heading Communicable Diseases, it's surveillance of AIDS in the UK, January 1982 to July 1983, prepared by the Public Health Laboratory Service, CDSC. And there is a discussion of the definition compiled by the Centre for Disease Control in the States and so on. If we go to the next page, there's a description of the surveillance system that being utilised by CDSC. And then if we go to the bottom left-hand column, just a little bit further down, thank you. So we can see there it's recorded by 31st of July 83, 14 cases of AIDS have been reported to CDSC, mainly from clinicians, and details of those are set out. And then if we skip over a paragraph, of the 14 patients, 12 were homosexual, one was also a drug user, 10 were reported from London, one from Bristol and one from Oxford. The haemophiliac patient was from Wales and had received factor VIII imported from the US. A patient from Lancashire, that may be the Preston case, did not come within the known risk groups. So Kevin's case there set out as it would appear from CDSC's perspective, consistent with what we've seen, an accepted case of AIDS. And just picking up communications in journals about the classification of cases. In relation to the Bristol case, that emerges in the medical literature in November of 1983. If we could just look at PRSC 304509. This is a letter from Dr. Daly and Dr. Scott of the Bristol Hemophilia Centre. So it gives details of the Bristol case. If we look at the first paragraph, it says 6 lines down, no definite case of AIDS in a haemophiliac has yet been reported in Britain. Although one patient may have early features of the syndrome, we report here a fatal case of AIDS in a haemophiliac who received intensive treatment with factor VIII concentrate of US origin. And then there is a description of his symptoms picking up from January 1982. And if we go further down that page, please, Shamek. We can see under the table the Bristol patients described in March 1982 as presenting with herpes zoster, symptoms of being unwell, lethargic, listless, so malaise, to use the terminology of the AIDS 3 form. And then we can see again reference to herpes and oral thrush in the last paragraph, and indeed to wider candida infections in other parts of the body. And then over the page, so not over the page, right-hand column towards the top of the page, we can see then it's saying at this time, that's May 1983, AIDS was suspected. And it refers then to T-cell studies supporting the diagnosis, various immunological blood data there set out, and then a further description of his symptoms in August 1983. So it would appear that from this at least, that AIDS was suspected in that patient from May of 1983, but was not reported until early September 1983 to CDSC, and that may be an issue we'll need to explore further. Returning to Kevin, this letter had suggested that no definite case of AIDS in a haemophiliac had yet been reported in Britain, which was obviously incorrect because we have Kevin's case. And there was a response to this from the Centre for Disease Control, the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre, PRSE 304506.
Stop you there for a moment,
Yes, certainly.
Ms. Richard. If we go back to the left-hand column at the top, where it says no definite case of AIDS has yet been reported, that one patient may have early features of the syndrome, there's a reference. It's reference 4. What footnote is that? What's the footnote referred to?
It's to the article in the BMJ that we looked at a few moments ago.
Yeah.
So the CDSC article in the BMJ.
Right.
And then if we then go to the response to Dr. Daly and Dr. Scott's letter, PRSE 304506, and if we zoom in on the letter in the left-hand column, which is headed Haemophilia and AIDS in the UK, please, Shumik. It says, in their otherwise clear account of a fatal case of AIDS in a haemophiliac in the UK, Dr. Daly and Dr. Scott, referring to our account of AIDS surveillance, state that no definite case of AIDS in a haemophiliac has yet been reported in Britain, although one patient may have early features of the syndrome. The Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre does indeed collect data on patients who may have early features of AIDS, but our paper included only those cases which met the definition of AIDS compiled by the Centres for Disease Control Atlanta on March the 15th, 1983. The information kindly provided to us about the haemophiliac we mentioned led us to include him as a definite case of AIDS. And that is undoubtedly a reference to what they described in their paper as the Welsh case, but to Kevin.
Yes.
So regarded by CDSC as a definite case of AIDS.
Yes.
Kevin's health continued to deteriorate, and we can see that from the medical records from October of 1983, CVHB 40-157_394. So he's seen on the 17th of October 1983, again the consultant under whose care he is identified as Professor Bloom, although this is an entry that is made by Dr. May. Seen in Haemophilia Centre, known acquired immunodeficiency, so identified by the doctor seeing him there on the 17th of October as a known AIDS case. And then there is a description of his symptoms, getting well, vomiting, frontal headache, shivery, coughing, sometimes productive. And the examination is carried out. If we go over the page, we can see the second line is question mark, opportunistic pathogen. And then this underlined, he needs yellow stickers on bloods. So that's how his bloods are going to be treated. And then bottom of the page, 18th of October 1983, SB seen by Professor Bloom. There's a reference over the next page to his current lymphocyte count being better than it has been for months. That's the NB. The suggestion being that the lymphocyte count has been worse earlier. And then 19th of October 1983, weight loss and repeated, I'm not sure what the next two words are, sir. Yes.
Repeated infections certainly suggest
Certainly
AIDS.
suggests, thank you, but regrettably. And there's a reference to something being quite in keeping with PC infection, I think that must say.
Pneumococcal infection.
Yes, exactly. And there's a plan then set out, and if we go to the top of the next page, we can see the plan being discussed with Professor Bloom and Professor Bloom agreeing to it there. And again, if we look at the admission records, CVHB 40-157_569. So this is the form that we've now seen on a number of occasions. This is for his admission on the 17th of October. Reason for admission/diagnosis, pneumonia. Additional health problem, says haemophiliac, known acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And he's described as a pale-looking young man with a chesty cough and head cold. So recorded there clearly as a known case of AIDS. And again, if we just look at CVHB 40-157_068, CVHB 40-157_608. Sorry. think I said it wrong. This is a virology sheet. It's not the records that it's not the results that are significant, but we see date of collection, 17th of October 1983, clinical information, haemophilia, pneumonia, AIDS. So again, within the hospital, clearly regarded by this time as a definite AIDS case. If we then look at HSOC 0029476_031, this is a meeting of the Hemophilia Society's Executive Committee on the 6th of December 1983. There are a number in attendance. It doesn't include Professor Bloom, but obviously we know that there were communications between the Haemophilia Society and Professor Bloom throughout this period. If we go to the top of the next page, please, Shemek, with just the first two lines, while there were no new suspected cases, obviously it would appear the Haemophilia Society have not picked up on the Bristol case, it was noted that the Cardiff case was now confirmed. It's not quite clear why the Haemophilia Society was identifying Kevin's cases in December 1983 of now confirmed. It may have been on the basis of information from Professor Bloom, but if so, what the basis for that was is also unclear in light of the history. It may be that's a matter we can explore further with Mr. Waters next week. We can see also in December a report in the BMJ which refers to both the Bristol case and to Kevin. It's PRSE 303773. This is in fact authored by Dr. Peter Jones. It's headed AIDS, Hepatitis and Haemophilia, and if we just look at the bottom left-hand column, it's the last few lines on the page. Talks about 17 cases of AIDS having been reported in the US amongst people with haemophilia. 10 patients have died, all with PCP. And then it refers to the position in Britain. 2 cases of haemophilia and AIDS have been reported to the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre at Colindale. 1 patient with PCP has died, GL Scott, personal communication, so that is the Bristol case. And the other has had opportunistic infections, Professor Bloom, personal communication. So that would suggest some form of dialogue or discussion between Dr. Jones and Professor Bloom, in which Professor Bloom has informed Dr. Jones that his patient has opportunistic infections. There is then an overview of Kevin's situation in a letter at the end of 1983, 21st of December 83, showing it's WITN 34080015. Go to the next page. So this is a letter, it's from Professor Bloom himself, 21st of December 83, to a consultant ENT surgeon. You may remember seeing Kevin a couple of years ago. He's the 20-year-old youth with severe haemophilia who had some sinus washouts 2 or 3 years ago. Unfortunately, since then and during the last 9 months, Kevin has had some rather more serious troubles. He presented in March with severe oropharyngeal and esophageal candidiasis and had severe dysphagia and had lost a stone in weight. So that's dated back to March by Professor Bloom. It became clear that his cell-mediated immunity was quite severely impaired, and he had a severe lymphopenia with a reduction of T4 lymphocytes. Although his candidiasis cleared up, he subsequently developed other opportunistic infections, including severe herpes, which necessitated treatment, and more recently an acute pneumonia, which was clinically typical of PCP. In summary, therefore, Kevin is a severe haemophiliac who almost certainly has the acquired immune deficiency syndrome and has suffered from a number of opportunist infections over the past 9 months. His current treatment is then described. And the bottom of the page, Professor Bloom says this: clearly, with the added complication of the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, operative or invasive treatment would be most undesirable, and of course his blood should be treated as infective. And then over the page, he goes on to ask for the ENT surgeon's views on whether anything could be done in relation to Kevin's sinuses, and we can see the letter is from Professor Bloom. So there is a summary from Bloom himself of Kevin's condition and the various manifestations of AIDS over that 9-month period from March of 1983. So, in terms of the following year, there were repeated hospital admissions. Kevin was admitted as an emergency in January 1984. He was coughing up blood. He remained in hospital for a few days. We'll perhaps just look at that. CVHB 40157_384. If we just look at the first few lines, we can see there is the triangle diagnosis, AIDS, March 1983, and there are various references in Kevin's notes in the course of 1984 to the AIDS diagnosis and dating it back to March of 1983. I won't go to all those references, we've set out some of them in the note. What is not possible to pick up from the documents in terms of the medical records is any discussion between the treating clinicians and Kevin about his condition. There is no record of any communication to him of an AIDS diagnosis. There is material arising out of a Department of Health and Social Security request for information for the purposes of attendance allowance, which may suggest that Kevin was not told of his diagnosis, even as late as the autumn of 1984. So if we look at CVHB 40157_041, this is a DHSS letter. It's addressed to Dr. Bloom. It's dated the 19th of October 1984. The context is Kevin having made an application for attendance allowance. In the second paragraph, Dr. Bloom is asked to supply a factual report based on your knowledge and records of the case. And then if we see the box, which is the fourth paragraph down, but the text is in a box, a copy of your report may have to be sent to the claimant in the event of an application being made to the board to review their decision or an application for leave to appeal against their decision. There is power to withhold any information which would be harmful to the claimant's health. If, in your opinion, any of the information should be considered in this light, please note the relevant items of your report. Accordingly, there's no power to withhold information on any other grounds. So that's the request that was made. And then if we go to CVHB 40157_042, the form's completed, but it's not signed, and so we don't know which clinician signed it. We know the letter was sent to Dr. Bloom, but we don't know whether it was Dr. Bloom or someone else in his department who completed this. We can see handwritten out is the information that's requested by the DHSS. Present condition, what attention does he require normally for bodily function? What's the frequency of bleeds? are there any reasons why he can't give his own factor 8 injections? And then report from medical practitioner. Kevin Slater has severe haemophilia A. He also has chronic pneumocystis pneumonia and recurrent oral thrush. And there's an asterisk. And we'll come to that in a moment. 2, he is able to care for normal bodily functions. 3, he has bleeds approximately once a fortnight. 4, hand bleeds will preclude self-treatment. And then there's reference to a particular feature of his haemophilia associated with his chronic pneumonia, which may require prompt medical care. And then this, the asterisk, information to be withheld if report is sent to Mr. Slater. These clinical findings, together with evidence of depressed immunity, mean that he has the syndrome of acquired immune deficiency AIDS. So one interpretation, at least, of that document might be that those clinical findings and or the syndrome of AIDS, the diagnosis of AIDS, is to be withheld from Kevin. We can't see anything in the records which casts any further light on that question on the basis of the material we've seen. In terms of the wider picture in the autumn of 1984, we look at CBLA 301884_007. This is a document dated the 10th of September 1984. It's headed Current Situation Regarding AIDS. The attached table and histograms are based on reports received from haemophilia centres on the patients who received the same batches of blood products as the Cardiff and Bristol AIDS cases. And if we go over to the third page, please, Shomik, we see, by way of example, in various tables, the top histogram showing number of patients having received commercial factor 8 related to AIDS case A1. And A1 is the labelling used by Dr. Krask to refer to Kevin's case. A4 is the Bristol case. We don't need to look at the detail of it. There are various other tables there set out. But what we see in terms of the wider picture is that by the 10th of September 1984, there is a public health investigation underway to potentially identify what batches of blood products may have been used to treat patients other than the Cardiff and Bristol cases. And yet, within that same period of time, the autumn of 1984, there is evidence to suggest that Kevin himself has still not been informed of his diagnosis. We know also from CVHB 40157_307 this is a letter from November of 1984. It's from a physician in the Newport Chest Clinic to a Dr. Moffat in the Haematology Department, the University Hospital of Wales. It's copied to Professor Bloom and others. We know from the last paragraph, last sentence, the prognosis is obviously very poor, is what is there set out by the consultant physician in the chest clinic, who had been seeing Kevin because of his symptoms of pneumonia. There is then a pattern of repeat admissions to the University of Hospital Wales over the coming months. His records record PCP having been diagnosed in October of 1983. There are records to suggest that a degree of barrier nursing and again we see a reference to the diagnosis of AIDS having really dating from March 1983 in a letter from Dr. Lucas That's at WITN 3408-021. This is, if we go to the next page, this is at 4th of December 84. Dr. Guy Lucas, who we know subsequently took up a post in Manchester Haemophilia Centre, but at this stage was working in the University Hospital of Wales. This is the chap with severe haemophilia A who was diagnosed as having AIDS in March 1983. Recently his weight loss has accelerated and chest signs have deteriorated. And then there is a plan for a biopsy. And then if we go to CVHB 40157_330, we see the formal anti-HTLV3 positive test result. It would look as though the sample was taken possibly at the Royal Gwent Hospital in Newport on the 22nd of November, and the test comes back dated the 12th of December 1984, anti-HTLV3 positive, because of course by then testing is available. I should say that there is an extract from the National Haemophilia database which gives a date of a positive test or first positive test as the 15th of July 1984. So it may be that another test was carried out on a stored sample, but if so, we haven't got any other records other than what's set out in the National Haemophilia database. Again, Kevin was in and out of hospital on various occasions in early 1985. The medical records, and I won't go through them in detail, but they document the continuing deterioration of his health. He's described as weaker, as moving slowly, disturbed sleep, thrush infections and so on are recorded. He was an inpatient for several weeks, February, March of 1985, again with a range of problems recorded. He'd been coughing up blood, pneumocystitis again, and so on. He was admitted again in April of 1985, and the medical records record him as deteriorating slowly physically. And then in records relating to an admission at the end of April and early May 1985, he is by that time described as very thin, emaciated. He was unable to move or stand up on his own. Poignantly, and consistent with references in earlier records, he's described as remaining bright and cheerful with no other complaints. If we then look, just briefly at I think a couple of other documents, CVHB 40157_035. We can see a letter from Professor Bloom to a Mr. Lal, Medical Services Officer and Pharmaceutical Division, Bayer House. And it's a request for assistance regarding Kevin, and it's a request to use a particular drug, Shuramin, since we are otherwise coming to the end of the line, is what Professor Bloom says, and he asks if Mr. Lal would consider letting him have it for a prescription on a named patient basis. There are then repeat admissions in the course of May and June. Kevin's described by now as weak as a kitten. His final admission to hospital was on the 16th of June, and he remained in hospital until his death on the 23rd of June of 1985. There is just one further letter I will put on the screen following his death. WITN 3408-024. If we go to the next page, it's a letter from a haematology registrar Dr. Lush, to what is probably the GP. It's the 9th of July 1985, and it records Kevin's last admission and his death. Admitted 6th of June 85, died 23rd of June 85. Cause of death, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. The history is then set out. It's the recent history that's set out there of the last admission. We can see in the second paragraph, last sentence, he was generally weak, had become unable to hold even a glass of milk for himself, and his parents had to feed him. There is a description of the drugs he was receiving on admission for his condition, examination, and so on. And if we go to the second page, last paragraph, it's recorded that over the next few days his condition gradually deteriorated, his speech became incoherent, he was experiencing some pain, he required intravenous fluids, he gradually became unconscious and died on the 23rd of June. In view of the nature of his disease, the death was reported to the coroner, but obviously no post-mortem was performed. Kevin was just 22, so when he died. So he said that is the information that we have identified relating both to Kevin's own medical records and to how his case was viewed by various significant agencies and bodies and individuals, in particular in the course of 1983.
Yes, I'd just like to say to Miss Moore and Miss Charlotte that what they will have listened to, they have been listening. It cannot have been easy, but I would like to thank them very much indeed for their agreement that it should be aired. It is clear to me that although it is hard to hear, it is important to hear it, both and in particular for Kevin and what happened to him, but also to the reactions of those around him, to what he was suffering from and what they made of it, which is quite illuminating. So thank you very much to them. And I think we are now due a break, are we, Mr. Richards?
So yes, I'm sorry, I hadn't realised the time. I noticed it's nearly...
No, it was important to finish it.
I wanted to do that, sir, in one go. So it's nearly 12 o'clock, sir. In your hands as to whether we take a break now or take the lunch break early, or however you wish to proceed.
Well, let us take a break for those who've been listening, because as I say, it can't have been easy listening for some. And come back, shall we, at 12:15. We'll take a slightly later than usual lunch break at 1:15.
Thank you, sir.
Or thereabouts.